Hello, everyone. Welcome to the second edition of Race Matters podcast by the Equal Opportunities Commissions, or the EOC, aimed at promoting racial equality in the workplace. My name is Devi Novianti, and I am the Equal Opportunities Officer at the EOC. Today, we'll be discussing the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion in ESG reporting. We are very fortunate to have Ajay MK, Group Head of Diversity and Inclusion at Swire Group, with us to shed some light on this topic. Hello, Ajay. How are you?
Hi, Devi. Hi, everyone. My pleasure to be here.
Very good to have you here. Ajay, ESG reporting is a very hot topic these days. A lot of conversations and discussion around this topic. And I read your ESG and Sustainability Report 2022. May I know what is the significance of incorporating D&I and non-discriminatory in your sustainability and ESG reports, please?
Sure. It's one of the things which we have had a long tradition of including within our ESG reporting, because true to the name, social, or the S of ESG, is as important as the E, or the environment. And there is often a tendency in many companies when we think about ESG to focus almost entirely or primarily on the E, which is okay. But what we know from empirical evidence and research and our own experience is that a lot of the headway or progress you can make on environment doesn't happen unless you also make progress on the social aspects of sustainability. Now, within an organization too, it is crucial for one to use diversity, equity, and inclusion as a very important lever to create a sustainability mindset or a sustainability leadership. So that is one reason we said DEI should very much feature within our achievements as well as the opportunities within ESG. The second is, when you think about how do you make a people aspect of the business sustainable, or how do you create human sustainability, very much inclusion becomes a key tenet of how do you make sure that the people part of your business is sustainable. And that's the reason we wanted to put it in, apart from making sure that we give equal focus on DEI and especially inclusion with the communities as well.
That's great to hear that, because I think a lot of companies put charity work mostly as. Now, I also understand that Swire Group have 5 DI focus area, and one of them is ethnicity. Can you explain how do you come up with these 5 priorities and goals? How do you work it out within the groups, and also how do you cascade down to individual companies, please?
Sure. So when we began our DI journey about 3 to 4 years back, we said the foundation of our journey is to make sure we have the right diversity in our workforce, which means have a workforce which represents the world that we operate in, which represents the consumers that we serve, as well as is representative of the population of the countries in which we operate. The second thing we looked at when we considered these 5 demographic aspects of diversity, which are in many ways the visible aspects of diversity, we said it's good to begin with these very visible aspects of diversity, make some progress in that, keep that as a foundation to do further work on DEI. We looked at what are the various ways in which a team or a workforce can be diverse, and how can that diversity in turn improve the, let's say, the performance of a team or the innovation of a team or the empathy of the team with the consumers, etc. There is a lot of research which shows that if you have more women in a leadership team or in a workforce, typically it improves the performance of the team or the productivity or the innovation. And in many aspects, it creates a more collaborative environment with that diversity. There is also research which shows that leadership team which has more diversity around ethnicity or race or people of national origin, those leadership teams and those companies tend to outperform companies with lesser ethnic diversity. Similarly, with having different generations, people with multiple abilities, disabilities, differential ability being represented, as well as people with different sexual orientation. So we felt those are the 5 dimensions we should start with, and a lot of investment was made to increase representation along these 5 dimensions. I'm very proud to say today we have active employee resource groups on each of these dimensions in all our operating companies. But I also want to say this is just a foundation. We don't want to say that just increasing the number of women or increasing the number of ethnic minorities in itself means that our DI maturity is high, because that is only step 1. So the 5 demographic factors are foundational. It becomes meaningless if the ethnic minorities you bring in, or the women you bring in, or people with disability you bring in, do not have an ecosystem which is conducive in which they cannot thrive. And this is where increased diversity needs to be matched by a corresponding increase in inclusion and equity. And this has to be felt by employees. This is part of everyday employee experience. So I would say the 5 were chosen carefully. After a lot of deliberation, a lot of internal discussion, we of course studied best practices, and we felt this is the best way to start.
You touch so many important points, Ajay. You talk about how this is good for business. You cite this McKinsey consulting report. You talk about making a conscious decisions of inclusions. And one thing that I hear about that, making investment to make sure that this thing happens. So what Swire Group have taken and implement in terms of moving the needle forward?
Sure. So the investment, I would put it in 3 broad buckets. The first is, of course, there is no running away that all of this requires dollars, because we have to hire D&I professionals, and today we have a extended DI team of nearly 8 or 10 of us within the public listed group. And apart from that, we have quite a bit of funding for various employee resource groups and so forth. But more important than that, I think, is the time we have spent as a leadership team talking about DEI, sharing the progress, but equally sharing the challenges and frustrations, and being very candid about it, and being very humble about certain areas in which we need to do further work. So I would say that time and attention of leadership at all levels is another very big investment. Third, increasingly in the last, I would say 12 months or so, we have invested in trying to adopt pioneering methodologies, new ways of advancing DEI, trying to make sure that DEI gets embedded in everyday work, in everyday culture, in everyday employee experience. And also we are making some investments to increase our capacity to measure our progress, not just in terms of diversity or achieving diversity target, but equally trying to measure how healthy our inclusive culture is in our workplaces. And all of this is a multi-pronged kind of an investment, and not an investment which is limited to any particular area. And we are, as we are speaking, conducting a very comprehensive assessment of our maturity on diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging in our 4 biggest operating companies: Cathay Pacific, Swire Properties, HECO, and Swire Coca-Cola. We are doing this for Asia to begin with. And what this means is examining and interrogating every talent and people practice from a lens of DEI. Anything and everything from a people process or practice or policy which touches an employee's life, right from the pre-hiring process to the recruitment, to onboarding, to design of variable bonus, performance management, succession planning, employee listening. The entire work of HR, in a sense, we believe is an important lever to ensure that we have an inclusive and equitable workplace. And rather than just look at bits and pieces, typically one always looks at recruitment, always looks at training, always looks at communication, as you said. But it's equally important to look at long-term incentives or variable bonus or succession planning, leadership development, benefits, all of it, to see whether in a very congruent fashion, everything one does in HR, they're all working towards increasing your inclusion index and equity index. So that hopefully gives you a flavor of the effort that we are putting in, and there is a lot of buzz and a lot of excitement, actually, not just within the DI team, but even within the HR team with this kind of a work.
That's fantastic to hear. You are actually looking into all aspect of the employee experience. Ajay's last questions. What kind of advice do you give to companies that wants to include this racial DEI within their ESG reports? That's number one. And number two, what do you think the benefit of including racial DEI in the ESG report?
Sure. My first suggestion would be take action, make sure you call out racial diversity as one of the very legitimate kinds of diversity in a multicultural society like Hong Kong or Asia. It is a very valid form of visible diversity, and begin by giving a platform, perhaps setting certain goals against it, and leaders walking the talk around it, and making a few decisions. Like I'm pretty sure, it must have been a conscious choice for Swire perhaps to appoint somebody like me coming from a ethnic minority in a senior leadership role. And so all of those visible actions matter. In terms of the benefit, I would say one should not look at any aspect of diversity in isolation. It would be in some ways self-defeating if an organization gets fixated on just gender or just ethnicity or any other aspect of diversity. Or in fact, if you get too obsessed with these visible kinds of diversity, but you don't pay equal attention to certain invisible kinds of diversity, like thinking styles of leaders or decision making, risk appetite, you want diversity in all of it, because the consumers you serve, the markets you operate in, they are all very diverse and they have many attributes. And so you want your workforce to reflect it. And like you said, if you have diversity in your workplace and if you have inclusion in your workplace, you are more likely to reflect it in the marketplace. And you're more likely to have empathy for a wide variety of customers, fulfill the need. You're very likely to find solutions which work for very different segments of your customers. So I believe racial diversity, like any other kind of diversity, conditions all of us who work in organization to see difference as a strength. Also, inclusion of racial diversity or inclusion of more women or people with a different sexual orientation or a disability that nobody has been exposed to. It checks our own bias. It checks our own stereotype, forces us to be much more open and collaborative as leaders, and to take skills and talent and ideas wherever it comes from. And that is the ultimate attribute of a high-performing team. You really don't care whose brainwave is it. I think the end journey of it, you just become an organization which is global in outlook, which is welcoming, which is inclusive. And that, I think, is really the power of DEI, and I would say racial diversity is another way of strengthening that muscle.
I absolutely agree, because I think it's not only by transforming the people, you're actually transforming the company as well. So with this, Ajay, I would like to say thank you for being here today and to share some of your insight about what you see DEI, how the DEI work in Swire Group, and why do you think it's important to put DEI, especially racial DEI, amongst others, in the ESG reporting. Thank you very much, Ajay. We look forward to hear your thought on other topics in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Devi. It was an absolute pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Have a great day.